And we are back with the fourth segment of the GSMC basketball podcast presented by the GSMC Sports Network. And in this fourth segment, we are going to be talking about the first round of the postseason, and we're specifically going to be talking about the Eastern Conference and those matchups and sort of why I feel like the teams ended up losing, the reason why they ended up losing, things of that nature, what I feel like they should do going into the next season, and all of that stuff. So we'll go ahead and start with the most competitive series in the entirety of the first round, and arguably the most competitive series in the entirety of the playoffs, the Cavs going up against the Magic. So this was one of the few series in the postseason that ended up going to 7 games. Now, this is one of three because, Timberwolves, they ended up going to 7 games with the Nuggets, and the Pacers ended up going to 7 games with the Knicks. And this was the first series that ended up going to 7 games. This was the longest series that ended up going to 7 games. And it was also arguably the least watched series in the entirety of the first round, which I find is kind of, crazy how a series that's this competitive didn't get this much coverage in the postseason. And one of the things that, could have affected that was the timing of when these games occurred. Like the Cavs and the Magic, they sometimes played as early as 1 o'clock in the afternoon. And not many people are going to be watching the TV and tuning in at 1 o'clock in the afternoon. There's other things that they have to do, other jobs, things of that nature. And like it's not prime time TV. And that's sort of I feel like that might have helped the Magic in this series because they didn't really have any kind of media coverage throughout the entirety of the season. There was barely any pressure on them to do any kind of good work in the postseason, and there was no pressure on them to even have a good season. So despite that, however, this series was back and forth. The Cavs, they won the 2 home games, and the Magic won the home game. Then the Cavs won their home game, then the Magic won their home game, and then the Cavs won the final home game. So it was really a battle of home court advantage and who was going to take advantage of that. And one of the things that I feel like both of the teams really suffered from was the lack of experience in the postseason. The Cavs, they had as a team, they really only played 1 year together in the postseason, and that was the previous year. And playing 1 year in the postseason, that's not enough to sort of develop a team into the championship caliber team that you want them to be. And there's obviously more chemistry issues that go along with that as well. But the fact that the Magic had a little bit less playoff experience and that they didn't have home court advantage was the ultimate reason why they didn't win the series. And I don't think this Magic team would have been enough to make it and win in the second round, and I don't think either one of the teams was going to beat the Celtics. This was really just the fact that they ended up matching up against the Celtics, and the Celtics are a bad matchup for any team in the Eastern Conference Finals. And it's really once if the Celtics go down, the story of the Eastern Conference was if the Celtics go down, it's anyone's game because I don't think any team with the current state that they were in was going to be able to put up a fight against the Boston Celtics. That's just me. And that's really the big reason why I feel I don't really need to talk about this series all that much because I think they would have lost anyway going up against the Celtics this year. So going into the next year, really they have to hope that Paolo has the same type of season that he did and was playing just as he was playing very well in the postseason. So they really just need more pieces centered around Paolo, and that is the ultimate goal. Next series in the Eastern Conference is the Celtics against the Miami Heat. Now, I'm not really going to dwindle on this series too much because I genuinely think that if the Heat were healthy, it doesn't matter. The Celtics were going to end up winning the series. Now, it probably would have been a little bit more competitive, but I still think the Celtics would have ultimately won the series in the end because this series ended in 5 games. They got lucky playing very well in game 2 while the Celtics were playing pretty bad in game 2. And that was the reason why they ultimately ended up winning 1 game in the series and they did not get swept. And that was sort of a common theme in the postseason at the time, the Celtics losing in game 2 after winning by a lot in game 1. But, just the fact that Jimmy Butler wasn't on the team, it really costed them the series. It would have made it more competitive, but I don't think they would have ended up winning the series against the Celtics. That's just me, though. So no need to really dwindle on that series. I think the Celtics were going to win from the jump. So next on the list is the Pacers going up against the Bucks, and this is the same story that I said when the Pacers went up against the Knicks. The biggest problem and the biggest reason why the Bucks didn't ultimately make it to the next round was the fact that Giannis was injured, and then shortly after, Damian Lillard went down with an injury as well, and that ultimately, it crippled the franchise, and it's sort of like they weren't going to win without Giannis, and they weren't going to win without Dame. And they lost both of them in this series. And that was really the ultimate reason why I think the Pacers sort of ended up being able to win this series in 6 games. Because, like, they struggled against a Bucks team. Like, they struggled to beat a Bucks team that didn't have Dame and didn't have Giannis. So I really think that if Giannis and Dame were active throughout the entirety of the postseason, this series would have played out a little bit differently, and the Bucks would have been the one going up against the Knicks, not the Pacers. And I also think that the Bucks, they also have, when they're healthy, I really think that they would have had a pretty good chance in beating the Knicks or making the Knicks series just as competitive. It's just Doc Rivers being their head coach and the lack of adjustments, I knew that was going to hold them and prevent them from making it far. And that's really the fact that they were injured, and the fact that they have Doc Rivers as their coach is like the biggest killers to the Bucks, and that's like the biggest reason why I feel like they didn't make it far in the postseason. And what they should do in the next season is, like, hopefully learn from these injuries. Hopefully Damian Lillard, like, because another aspect of Damian Lillard's game was that he wasn't the same player that he was from Portland. And Doc Rivers, he said before that Damian Lillard, he sort of how do I say this? He sort of took a little bit of he didn't work out that much in the off season when he was about to get traded to the Milwaukee Bucks because he was afraid of getting injured. And that played into, his play in the postseason. He was ridiculously out of shape. That's what he said. That's what he told Doc. And the fact that he was out of shape played into the season and how he just wasn't the same player that he was. So Dame has to get back in shape with the Bucks. Giannis has to be sure to stay healthy, and Doc Rivers has to learn from his coaching mistakes, and that's how the Bucks are going to eventually advance and would have a chance in beating the Celtics in a series, for next year. And that's sort of what they need to look for next year. Just make sure that they can keep Giannis healthy and make sure that they can get Dame at 100% so that way he could play the best, because this team was doing really good things with Dame, despite the fact that Dame wasn't really playing that well in the regular season whatsoever. He did get selected to be an all-star starter, but I feel like that all-star starting position could have been rewarded to somebody else on the Eastern Conference. So that's really the 3 things that the Bucks need to work on. Now, next was the Knicks going up against the 76ers. Now, the 76ers, they are notorious for losing before the Eastern Conference Finals round, so this was really no different for them. And the big problem was matchups. The fact that they were the 7th seed in the entirety of the Eastern Conference, the biggest reason why they were so low was because Joel Embiid got injured mid-season. And so really, if they want to get farther, they're going to have to be sure to take a high seed in the postseason so that way they can go up against one of those low-seeded teams and give them a better chance of winning the series in the end. And that's my thought process, and that's sort of the reason why I think the Sixers didn't end up winning this series. Granted, I don't think the Sixers were going to win a series because of Joel Embiid and just how he plays in the postseason. Like, that's just my overall opinion on the Sixers. I don't like how Embiid plays in the postseason, and his play in the postseason, it declines almost every single time, and he's also not healthy. So the big thing that the Sixers have to focus on is making sure that Joel Embiid is healthy throughout all of the season. And that's throughout every single postseason, Joel Embiid has been injured, and that's not ideal. You can't have your best player injured in every single postseason that you play in because that ultimately affects his play. and that hinders you from making it farther. It's like really the fact that he always gets injured, and the pieces on the team as well, they weren't playing well either. And so Tobias Harris, he was a no-show in the elimination game, and really the Sixers, what they need to do, they need to make sure that he's healthy, Joel Embiid's healthy. They need to make sure that they have good enough pieces, and those pieces perform in the right moments at the right time. And one of the biggest things that they're going to have to do this offseason if they want any kind of success is getting Paul George or a big time free agent with all the cap space that they're going to have. So that's what I think the Sixers need to do, and like for the next season and moving forward. Just make sure that Joel Embiid is healthy, and make sure that you're able to get Paul George in free agency, thus giving you a better chance of winning. Because if you can get a trio of Paul George, Tyrese Maxey, and Joel Embiid, that's a very solid trio, and that it could propel them to go farther into the postseason than they've ever gone. So that's my opinions, and Joel Embiid just needs to stay healthy, and the style of play that he has in the postseason needs to be adjusted, because foul baiting and constantly looking for fouls is not the way to go. That's just me though. So that's all I have for the fourth segment. So now we will go ahead and go into the fifth segment, where we talk about the Western Conference side of the first round, and just the opinions that I have on the Western Conference and what I think the teams need to do in order to make it far. So I'll be right back after this short break. Be sure to stay tuned.